She said it like she was telling me the weather. Dad, if you're not going to help around here properly, maybe it's time to find somewhere else to stay. I was standing at the kitchen counter, drying a cast iron pan I'd just washed. My son-in-law was on the couch behind me, feet up, watching the game. Neither of them had cooked a single thing that night. I had. I'd made the whole dinner. Pork tenderloin, roasted potatoes, steamed green beans, from scratch. After spending the afternoon picking up groceries they'd asked me to grab, since you're not really doing anything. I set the pan down slowly. I didn't say a word. My daughter was standing in the doorway, with her arms crossed, waiting to see how I'd react. I think she expected me to apologize, maybe grovel a little. That's what I'd been doing for the past 4 months, after all. I just nodded and said, "All right." She looked almost disappointed and walked away. I stood there alone in that kitchen for a long moment, listening to the crowd noise from the TV in the other room, and I thought, okay, so that's what this is. My wife, June, passed away 18 months before any of this happened. Pancreatic cancer. 7 weeks from diagnosis to the end. 7 weeks is not enough time to say everything you need to say to someone you've spent 31 years with. I'm not sure any amount of time would be, but 7 weeks is particularly brutal. Just long enough to hope, and then not long enough to do anything useful with that hope. We'd lived in the same house in Barrie, Ontario for 22 years. A 2-story on a quiet street, birch trees in the front yard. A backyard I'd slowly turned into something I was genuinely proud of. June had her garden along the back fence. Tomatoes, zucchini, herbs she'd dry and hang in the kitchen window. After she died, I kept the garden going for 1 summer, just to have something to do with my hands in the evenings. But it wasn't the same without her out there telling me I was overwatering. Our daughter, Melissa, called me about 3 months after the funeral. She and her husband, Trent, had bought a house in Oakville. New build, 4 bedrooms, finished basement, and they'd just had their second child. She said they could use an extra set of hands. She said it would be good for me to be around family. She said the house in Barrie was too big for one person. She wasn't wrong about that last part. I'd been rattling around in it like a marble in a shoebox. I was 61 years old, recently retired from 30 years in municipal engineering. I had a pension, some savings, and no idea what to do with myself. My son-in-law worked in finance downtown Toronto, long hours, early trains. My daughter had gone back to work part-time when the baby was 4 months old. She needed help. I said yes. I sold the house in Barrie, got a decent price for it. It was a good market that spring. I put the money in a GIC and moved into the spare room in Oakville, with 2 suitcases and a box of books. The spare room was on the main floor, just past the laundry room, across the hall from the baby's room. It had a single window that looked out at the side of the neighbor's garage. There was no closet, just a freestanding wardrobe they'd gotten from IKEA. The mattress was from a guest bed set they'd bought years ago, the kind that's fine for one night but starts to speak to you by week 3. I didn't say anything about any of it. I was a guest. I was there to help. That's what I told myself anyway. For the first few weeks, things were fine, normal even. I would get up with the baby in the morning when Trent left for the train, usually around 6:15, and give Melissa a chance to sleep in until 7:30 or so. I'd make breakfast. I'd take the older one, their 4-year-old son, to JK drop-off at 8:40. I'd come back, do a load of laundry, tidy the kitchen. I didn't mind any of it. I want to be clear about that. I genuinely didn't mind. June and I had always talked about spending more time with the grandkids. This was me doing that. It felt purposeful. But somewhere around the 6-week mark, things started to shift, slowly. The way water finds its way through a crack. You don't notice it happening until there's already a stain on the ceiling. Trent started leaving his dry cleaning on the floor outside my door, just piled there, in a plastic garment bag, when I'd come out in the morning. At first I figured it was a mistake. I brought it to him and said, "I think you left this in the hall." He said, "Yeah, I wasn't sure when you were going into town. Could you drop it off at the cleaners on Kerr?" He said it the way you'd ask someone to grab a coffee. I dropped it off. The following week, there were 2 bags. Then it became every week, just assumed. No asking anymore. The bags appeared. I dealt with them. Then there were the meals. Melissa had mentioned, early on, that they'd love it if I cooked dinner a few nights a week. Whenever you feel like it, no pressure. I enjoy cooking. I've always enjoyed it. It was something June and I did together on weekends. Nothing fancy, just real food made properly. So I cooked. Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Then it became most nights, because if I didn't cook, dinner would be DoorDash. and Trent would sigh audibly about the delivery fees while eating it. I'd hear him from the kitchen. I started cooking every night. I want to explain something about myself, because I think it matters. I was not raised to complain. My father worked in the mill in Solstain, Marie until he retired at 67, same job for 40 years. And he came home every night and fixed whatever needed fixing, same as his father. Nobody talked about feelings. Nobody said, I need more. You did what was in front of you. I'm not saying that's right, I'm just saying it's what I knew. So when I found myself making grocery lists in the evening, running errands in the morning, picking up the older one from school in the afternoon, I didn't stop to ask whether this was what I'd agreed to. I just did it. By month 2, I was also doing the housekeeping. Not deep cleaning, a cleaner came every 2 weeks, but the daily maintenance, wiping counters, vacuuming, keeping the mudroom organized because Trent was particular about the mudroom. On Sundays I'd strip the beds, wash the sheets, remake them. Theirs too. I told myself I was being useful. There was a Sunday in late October, about 3 months in, when I started to understand what was actually happening. Melissa and Trent had some friends coming over that evening, a couple they'd known since university. Nice people, from what I could tell. I'd spent most of Saturday making a full meal, a slow braised beef, short rib, roasted root vegetables, a potato gratin that takes the better part of an afternoon. I'd also made a cheese board, a dessert, set the dining room table properly. About an hour before the guests arrived, Melissa came into the kitchen and said, "Oh, Dad, could you maybe eat in your room tonight? It might be a little awkward, they don't really know you, and the table only seats 6 comfortably." I turned around from the stove. "I'm the one who cooked all of this," I said. She had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "I know, and we really appreciate it, but it would just be easier." I looked at her for a moment. She looked at the floor. "Sure," I said. I made myself a plate, went to my room, and sat on the edge of that thin mattress and ate alone. I could hear them laughing through the wall. At one point I heard Trent say, "I made this gratin, old family recipe," and everyone said how wonderful it was. I put down my fork. I sat there for a while after I'd eaten, just sitting in the dark. Not upset, exactly. Something quieter than upset. Something more like clarity. I made myself small, I thought, and somewhere along the way, small became invisible. There's a difference between being needed and being valued. I'd spent 3 months being very, very needed, but I was starting to understand those weren't the same thing, not even close. Things came to a head slowly, then all at once. The week after the dinner party, I went for a walk one morning and ran into a neighbor from down the street. A retired teacher named Frank who I'd chatted with a few times over the fence. He asked how I was settling in. I told him I kept busy. He said he had a buddy in his walking group who might be good company if I was ever interested. I went home thinking about that, about how I hadn't done a single thing for myself in 3 months. I hadn't called my friends from Barrie. I hadn't gone to the Legion where I'd been a member for years. I hadn't fished. I hadn't read anything longer than a magazine. I was so busy being useful that I'd forgotten to be a person. That same week, Trent asked me if I could handle the car, take his SUV in for an oil change, wait there, drive it home. I said I would. I sat in the dealership waiting room for 2.5 hours. When I got back, he didn't look up from his laptop. No thank you, no acknowledgement at all. That night, Melissa told me her friend was coming to stay for a few days and would need my room, so could I sleep on the pullout in the basement? I said, "Of course." I spent 3 nights on that pullout. My lower back, which had been bothering me for years, reminded me every single morning how old I was. On the last night, I lay there staring at the drop ceiling, and I thought about the house in Barrie, the birch trees in the front, June's garden, the bedroom where we'd slept for 22 years, where I'd held her hand when she stopped being able to get up. I sold all of that so I could sleep on a fold-out couch in my daughter's basement and be thanked for nothing. And then the following Tuesday evening, she said it. "Dad, if you're not going to help around here properly, maybe it's time to find somewhere else to stay." She said it because I hadn't made dinner that night. I had driven 40 minutes each way to pick up a prescription that Trent had forgotten, come home, and laid down with a migraine. For one night, no dinner appeared, and that was enough. I lay there in the dark of my little room, listening to the baby monitor crackle through the wall, and I made a decision. Not an angry decision, not a revenge decision, just a quiet, clear-eyed decision. The way you decide to finally fix a fence post that's been leaning for too long. I'm going to leave. I didn't tell them. That's the part people always ask about when I tell this story. Why didn't you just talk to her? And I understand the question. I've asked it myself. But here's what I know. I had been trying to communicate, in every way except words, that something was wrong. I had been shrinking. I had been retreating. I had been hoping someone would notice, and no one did. And at 61 years old, I was done hoping someone would notice. I spent the next 2 weeks doing two things simultaneously. The first was continuing to do everything I'd been doing, making dinner, running errands, picking up the boy from school. Not because I was being a martyr, but because those were real people, including a 4-year-old and a baby who hadn't done anything wrong. And I wasn't going to blow up their daily routine while I figured out my exit. The second was apartment hunting. I called a property manager I knew from my years in municipal work, a straightforward guy named Phil, who managed a few small residential buildings in Hamilton. He had a one-bedroom unit coming available in a low-rise on the west side of the mountain, second floor, decent-sized kitchen, a balcony that faced south, 840 square feet. Nothing fancy. Everything I needed. I drove out to see it on a Thursday afternoon while the kids were napping and Melissa was in a work call. I walked through it twice, stood on the balcony for a few minutes, looking out at the escarpment, and told Phil I'd take it. First and last month's deposit came out of my GIC. It didn't hurt. I booked a moving truck for a Saturday 2 weeks out, a small one half-day rental from U-Haul, because everything I had fit in the spare room. I called my buddy Terry from Barrie and asked if he wanted to come help me move a few boxes in exchange for a case of Keith's. He said absolutely, didn't even ask why. I didn't tell Melissa any of this. On the Friday night before I moved, I made dinner one last time. Chicken thighs roasted with lemon and garlic, the way my wife used to make them. I set the table. I fed the older boy his plate first, cut his chicken up the way he liked it. I held the baby for a while after dinner, sitting in the armchair by the window while Melissa loaded the dishwasher. She said, "Dad, can you get groceries tomorrow morning?" I made a list, I said. "I'll put it on the counter before I go." She nodded and went back to the dishes. That night I packed my 2 suitcases and my box of books. I also packed a small framed photo of June from my nightstand, and a cast iron pan I'd bought at a garage sale in 1987 and had been cooking with ever since. I'd brought it from Barrie. I wasn't leaving it. Saturday morning I was up at 6. Terry arrived at 7 with coffee from Tim Hortons, 2 large double doubles because he remembered, and we had the room cleared in under an hour. There wasn't much. 2 suitcases, the box of books, a small lamp, a gym bag of toiletries. The wardrobe had come with the house, so I left it. The mattress too. Melissa and Trent were still asleep. I put the grocery list on the kitchen counter. I also left an envelope with a short note inside. "I'm moving out today. I've found a place in Hamilton. I have the address and I'll send it along when I'm settled. The mortgage is yours to manage, and so is the grocery list. I love you and I love the kids. I'll see them soon." Daddy didn't say I was angry. I wasn't by then. I was just done. I locked the front door behind me, put the key through the mail slot, and walked to the truck. Terry looked at me over the roof of the cab. He didn't say anything for a second. Then he said, "You doing okay?" "Better than I've been in months," I said. He nodded. "Good, let's go." The apartment in Hamilton needed a few things. Phil had left the kitchen clean but bare, and the living room was just 4 walls and afternoon light. I spent the first weekend putting it together. A trip to IKEA in Burlington for a small couch and a proper bed frame. A stop at a used furniture place on Barnesdale for a kitchen table and 2 chairs. I put June's photo on the windowsill. I hung nothing on the walls yet because I wanted to think about it. I went to the grocery store on Sunday, a no frills on Upper James, and bought what I wanted. Not what was on someone else's list, what I actually wanted. I stood in the produce section for probably 10 minutes, just because I could. I bought good coffee and a bag of oranges and a piece of salmon for dinner. I cooked that salmon on my cast iron pan and ate it at my kitchen table, alone, with the radio on. CBC Radio 2, an old habit, and it was, I am not exaggerating, one of the best meals I'd had in months. The first call came Sunday evening, Melissa. I let it go to voicemail. She said she hoped I was okay, that she was surprised, that she wished I'd talked to her. She sounded more confused than upset. I listened to the message twice and then I went to bed. The calls picked up over the following week. Melissa, once or twice a day. Trent, twice, which surprised me. A number I didn't recognize that turned out to be Melissa calling from her work phone when I stopped answering the other one. By the end of the week, I had counted 31 missed calls across all 3 numbers. I didn't answer any of them, not out of cruelty. I want to be clear about that. I'm not a cruel person, and this was not a revenge plan. I just had nothing to say yet. I was still figuring out what I felt, and I've never been good at talking through things in real time. I needed to sit with it first. I went for a walk every morning that week, down the trail along the escarpment, sometimes as far as the Dundas Lookout. The valley below was going to full autumn color, red and gold and orange, layers of it all the way to the horizon. I'd lived in Ontario my whole life, and I'd never once stood at that lookout in October. I stood there for a long time. I called Terry on Wednesday evening and talked for an hour. I called my buddy from the Legion in Barrie, Dave, who I hadn't spoken to since June's funeral. He said, "I was wondering when you'd call." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just said, "I know." About 10 days after I moved, I called Melissa back. I didn't say I was angry. I didn't list grievances. I told her calmly that I'd come to understand, over those 4 months, that the arrangement had become something other than what I'd agreed to, that I'd been contributing more than was reasonable, and had been given less consideration than I deserved. I told her I wasn't calling to assign blame. I just wanted her to understand why I'd left. She was quiet for a while on the other end. Then she said, "I didn't realize how much you were doing." I said, "I know you didn't," she cried a little. I stayed on the line. I'd loved this person since before she could walk. Nothing about this was satisfying in the way some people might imagine. It wasn't triumph. It was sad, honestly. But it was also honest, and I hadn't been honest, with her or with myself, for a long time. We talked for about 40 minutes. By the end of it, she'd agreed that things had gotten out of balance. She said she was sorry. Trent sent me a text later that week that said, "Sorry, Glenn." Short, a bit stilted, clearly not his comfort zone, but he sent it, and I respected that. I'm writing this from my kitchen table in Hamilton, about 7 months after I moved in. The apartment is mine now, in the way spaces become yours. The coffee ring on the counter, the stack of books I'm working through, the plant on the windowsill that I somehow haven't killed yet. I know which step on the staircase creaks. I know the sound the building makes in the wind. I see the grandkids about twice a month. I pick up the older one for the afternoon sometimes, take him to the park at Sam Lawrence, let him run himself ragged. The baby's starting to recognize my face when I walk in. That's something. I'm not angry at my daughter. I was never really angry. I was tired, and there's a difference. She's a good person who got used to having help and forgot to notice the person providing it. That happens in families. It happens in marriages, too. You get comfortable and you stop seeing the things right in front of you. I think about June a lot these days. I think about how she used to say, when I'd get too caught up in taking care of things, "Glenn, love, sit down, nothing's on fire." She was right, usually. Nothing was on fire. Things just needed tending in their own time. I'm 62 now. I have a pension, a good apartment, an escarpment trail I walk almost every morning, and a cast iron pan that's been with me longer than most of my important decisions. I still cook, just for myself, mostly. Real food, made properly, at whatever pace I choose. Sometimes I cook too much and bring it next door to my neighbor Frank, who is 74, widowed, and never turns down a meal. Nobody leaves laundry outside my door. Nobody asks me what I'm making for dinner. And some mornings I stand on my balcony with a coffee, watching the light come up over the escarpment, and I think, I should have done this sooner. Not leaving, just this. Just deciding that my own life was worth showing up for. You don't have to win the argument to win back your life. You just have to quietly pick up your things and go.